Hello to everyone coming in today. Good afternoon or good morning. I'm not sure where you're joining us from. And speaking of that, we are so glad to have you with us, and we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Where are you joining us from? And teachers, if you have any kiddos with you, we'd love to know who is joining us today. Oh, I am seeing someone from California. Is it warm there? Because it is freezing in Ohio right now. It's raining. Oh my gosh. And Soledad, hopefully I pronounced that right, from Argentina. Wow, what is the weather like there? Massachusetts. Hello, Georgia. North Carolina. Wow. Orlando. One of my favorite places on earth because I am a Disney fanatic. It's summer there. It's a sunny day. Well, it is cold in Cincinnati and pretty dreary. So I've got my jacket on. It's kind of covering up my news literacy apparel. And I've even got my thinking cap on just for you all. Snowed in Washington State. Oh my gosh. Snow. Stormy in Virginia. Oh, thank you so much for joining us. Does anyone have their students joining with them? Any students in the building? We have so many wonderful things to share with you today. If you are joining with students, don't forget there is that document they can fill out as we go through the program this evening or this afternoon, evening. What am I thinking? As we go through the program this evening, your students can fill out that document. They can even submit questions because there'll be a part of the program where you get to participate by submitting your questions to us. Looks like Tony and Aaron both have students. Can you give us a ballpark of how many young people you have joining with you today? I am just so excited to get to engage with our young people today. Hey, Kate. Kate's in South Carolina. What part are you in? I think I always ask you that when I see you in programming. We will start in 1 minute, but if you're just joining us, please let us know in the chat where you're from, if you've got students with you, and if so, how many are joining you. We are so excited to have you here with us today. Ah, just past Myrtle Beach. Okay. Yeah, awesome. I've been to Myrtle Beach before. 16 students with Tony, 3 students with Michelle. Tamerlane's got 2 students in Western New York. Awesome. And if you don't have students with you today, you will be getting this presentation as a recording so you can share it with your students later. All right, y'all. So it's just about 1 o'clock. We are going to go ahead and get started. I believe that you are seeing my screen. Oh, more students in the building. We've got students in Atlanta, Georgia, students in Illinois, students in Downers Grove. Oh, this is just incredible. Um, all right, let's get right into the program. So, this program is a very special event for National News Literacy Week, which is still going strong. We've got one more day to really shine a light on news literacy. And this program is entitled Hard Hits, Hidden Truths: How Investigative Journalism Tackled the NFL's Concussion Problem. Do we have any football fans in the building? Because I'm a football fan, and this is right up my alley. I love, love, love not only football, but learning about how doctors and researchers are making football even safer. All right. So just to show you the order of the program today, could one of my teammates who's joined me just confirm in the chat that you do see my screen, please? I just want to make sure everything's going well. But just to talk about our agenda, I am going to obviously give you all a welcome, which I'm doing now. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Ellen, for confirming. And then I'm going to introduce my colleague, Jake, who is going to lead us through a conversation with Jeanne Marie, who is an investigative journalist and an author of, y'all, 8 books. This is incredible. I am so excited for this session. After they finish their conversation, there will be time for you to get involved with your students. Don't forget that you can submit questions either through the Q&A button that you'll see on your screen, or you can fill them out using the link to the document that my colleagues will drop in the chat throughout this presentation. And without further ado, I'd like to bring up my colleague, Jake. Jake is our director of social media. So he's responsible for all of those cool posts that you see us push out across our social media platforms, like LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, Jake posts a lot there. Blue Sky. Oh man, he's a very busy gentleman. Jake, feel free to come off mute and speak with all of these wonderful people here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brittany. I'm super excited to be here as well, and really just ready to dive into this conversation. Longtime football fan myself, but also someone who is impacted in terms of my fandom when the findings that came out after Jeanne Marie's article became public knowledge. So this is a topic that really resonates with me, and I think is perfect for not only National News Literacy Week, but for Super Bowl week as well.
For sure. And as the mom of a young football player, I'll definitely be listening in. I'm going to go off screen and let you get right into it. But I'll be back to chat with the audience later.
Great. Well, thanks again, Brittany. I am now really excited to introduce our guest for today's webinar. I'm really enthused to introduce Jeanne Marie Laskas, who is a renowned author of, as Brittany said, 8 books, including the New York Times bestseller Concussion, which was the basis for the 2015 Golden Globe nominated film. Jeanne Marie is here today to discuss the article that led to that book and the film, her 2009 GQ magazine story, Bennett Omalu, Concussions and the NFL, How One Doctor Changed Football Forever. The story profiled Omalu and other scientists who had made a stunning discovery. The accumulation of hits pro football players take can lead to serious brain injuries. It was a story the NFL did not want to go public, but Jeanne Marie took on one of the most powerful corporations and beloved brands in the country to tell the story of those affected. And today I'm so glad to have her here for this discussion about investigative journalism and its watchdog role and the groundbreaking story. Welcome, Jeanne Marie.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake, and thank you, Brittany. And I'm so happy to be here and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you want to be part of our conversation.
Yeah, and it's so exciting, the number of students that we have here today as well. So just to start, very basic first question here. Briefly describe the story that you tell in that article from 2009.
Sure. Okay, so this is essentially a story about one scientist, Dr. Bennett Omalu, who was an immigrant to this country from Nigeria, quite young, working as a forensic pathologist in a morgue in Pittsburgh. He was the kind of guy who takes the dead bodies and cuts them open and tries to figure out how they died, which is typically a straightforward conversation to have. But in this particular case, he got one body in and something looked strange. And so Bennett wanted to figure out how this person died. His name was Mike Webster, and he was an NFL player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bennett knew nothing about football, really nothing, nor did he even know what the NFL was. So he had really kind of no agenda going into this. He really just wanted to understand the strange circumstances under which this man, this 50-year-old man, 50-some-year-old man died. And as he did his research, which much of it he paid for entirely himself, he ended up bringing the brain home to his condo in the suburbs. And he was obsessed with trying to answer this question of how this guy died, why he went crazy before he died. And he did have significant dementia. Bennett figured it out in the cells of Mike Webster's brain. He thought he was giving a gift to the NFL, that he was going to be able to tell them, hey, do you know this is happening to your players, or it's a possibility? And so he went in good faith to present his findings. And that's where everything went haywire. The NFL did not want to hear this, and did its best to pretend that Bennett did not exist, essentially. So I tell his story of the discovery and the fight to be heard.
Yeah, and of course the story is also told in the book that you wrote, and in the 2015 movie starring Will Smith. I had read a lot, but I hadn't watched the film until about a month ago in preparation for this, and it's a pretty good film. As that there's a long list of great Will Smith movies, but that one was pretty good. Can you describe, Jeanne Marie, how you came to cover this? Why this topic? Was this an area of interest to you prior to writing the article?
That's a really important question, because no, it was not a particular interest any more than anything I write about. I am not a sports writer, nor am I a science writer, nor am I an advocacy journalist. I am a really regular writer of stories about people. Particularly, my particular interest is in people who have something to say and no one is listening, or in communities that are really hidden and we don't appreciate, for example. That's kind of like my area of interest. So when my editor at GQ, I was under contract to write a number of stories with the magazine, came to me and said, hey, what about this football concussion crisis? Do you think there's something in there? I honestly didn't think it was a story for me, because it was not my area of expertise. And I need to make a really important caveat to this whole subject. I am not the capital J journalist who broke open the story of the NFL concussion crisis. There were many, 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 many people doing this kind of research. And a shout out to Alan Schwartz at the New York Times New York Times, did a whole bunch of research early on. And if you want more information, go to League of Denial. It's a fabulous book that tells a lot of the story I tell, but from a different angle. So a lot of people were curious. And so I got just curious enough to say, I don't know, let's see what's going on. Because there was some coverage. Like, it is not hard to think, if you bash your head against something repeatedly, it's going to be bad for you. This is not like breaking news. But there was something going on where these players were not being told what was happening to them. And that's the first thing that bothered me. But the main thing that bothered me is once I realized that Bennett had been silenced, not just by the NFL, but also by a portion of the scientific community. That's when I was like, okay, what is going on here? Anytime you have someone who's being silenced, a whistleblower essentially, that can't get the word out, that's worth looking into in no matter what kind of journalist you are. So that was kind of what got me really curious.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question, kind of, and you definitely touched on it, which is like thinking through, okay, wouldn't it have been enough for Omalu to have published his research in these peer-reviewed journals that scientists use to share findings. Why did you and other journalists, and I remember I read that book, League of Denial, which I thought was really good. And that was kind of, for me, the moment when my football fandom took a little bit of a turn and I started actually realizing. So you can only imagine like the players who are so just engrossed in the day to day of just trying to, stay on a team, make a team, just it's their livelihood. You can imagine how they wouldn't know any of this is going on. But kind of going back to the question, why was it not enough for like the peer reviewed journals to be what was out there? Why was it so important for kind of mainstream journalists to really get this out to the public?
Well, and here's where the investigative part comes in, because Bennett was doing that. He was publishing journals publishing articles in a journal called Neurosurgery, which was the top of the journal for this kind of work. And the very first piece he published, which was the story of Mike Webster that I talked about, that journal, he got it in the journal, but then a group of scientists who also wrote for that journal demanded its retraction. So what is that about? Scientists demanding retraction of other scientists? What's that about? And Bennett got this letter and he's like, what, you're trying to retract my research? Well, it turns out, and here's the investigative part, that that group of scientists were paid by the NFL. The NFL hired scientists to do the research and to promote a specific narrative that everything was fine. And that was working great until Bennett got into the picture, and where his research differed was that he had the scientific proof. He had an autopsy. He's the first person to ever autopsied an NFL brain. And he said, here it is. It's right here. And that became, they just had to silence him. So that's why it wasn't enough. I mean, he was trying, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah. His story is just absolutely incredible. And we'll get into it more, but can you kind of, from a journalist purview, can you take us behind the scenes of how you reported the story? How did you work with sources, many of whom, of course, were going through a lot, in many cases, going through trauma of having lost a loved one? How were you able to kind of gain their trust during your reporting process?
Well, the very first obstacle, honestly, was trying to find Bennett Omalu, because he had dropped out of the research. And that was the first big mystery. Like, where is this guy? He had been all through the scientific journals and then he was gone. So first trying to find him and like, what happened to you? I understand you're not doing this research anymore. And he's like, oh, yes, I am. No one will listen to me. So that was kind of like the first hurdle, was just even finding him, which now he's out in California somewhere. He used to be in Pittsburgh, where I am. But then it was a matter of, how do you deal with these families who are, you want to earn their trust because you want to hear what's actually happening in their families, because of typically it's only a husband who's a former NFL player who is suffering. And once I could get to the families, specifically the wives, they were so happy to tell their story and to have someone listen to them. And that's another thing I've really found from doing this work. A lot of people want to tell you what's going on and just want you to listen, and are trying to talk. So I did not find it difficult to find those folks. Found it difficult to talk to the scientists who were being paid off. That was difficult. But the actual players and their wives, they were like, thank you for listening to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important part of that kind of journalism, is just giving a voice to often the voiceless. Can you, more broadly speaking, just kind of pull back the curtain for folks on what is investigative journalism, and what do we mean when we say the watchdog role of a free press in a democracy?
Sure. It's so interesting. I love that you folks are so focused on this, because to me, it's it's becoming more and more and more and more and more and more important that we have a really robust journalist community of folks who are working hard to shed light on things that are getting darker and darker and darker. And the reason things become shrouded in darkness is not by accident, is there's usually some powerful somebody over top of it all trying to conceal what they're doing, either for power or for money or for influence, for whatever reason. And, journalists are getting a bad rap as of late, as if we're doing this for ourselves, or I don't know what people think our motivation would be. It's not like any of us are like particularly, we're not like well paid, like heroes of Hollywood. We do it because we believe in the work, and we believe that without us, people won't know what the hell's going on. Like, we're on the side of you. We're on your side, listeners and readers and viewers. We're doing the work that you would do too if you heard what we were hearing. And I think that there is just nothing more important, that we have citizens who take on that role.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. And the way that you wrote this piece, it's not just a straight news story with the facts. You really used vivid storytelling and to recreate scenes that you could not have possibly been present for. Why did you kind of take this approach to the story?
Yeah, that's a really important point, because then it's like there's kind of like the research portion of what you do, the investigative work, and then there's the storytelling portion of it, which to me is, and I would say, I don't know that you'll always hear this from everybody, honestly, but to me is equally as important as the facts that you've gathered, is how you're conveying this. Because in a lot of ways, I think journalists are kind of like translators, of explaining complex ideas that the regular person like me and like you on first blush is not going to get it. It's just like a lot of facts, and a lot of, you're like, yeah, what are you trying to say through this? And so what a writer or a journalist is doing is they're figuring out what the actual, how we can put this together in an understandable story. And in this case, with such a honestly sympathetic character, who had no agenda, for me, my decision was to, okay, let's just really get in the mind of this guy who could be, you or me stumbling into a discovery and then trying to tell people. So how does that make you feel emotionally? Is a way that I'm going to get to how you're processing this intellectually. To go straight to the brain is to process information is often not the quickest route. I think it's often through an emotional response, and that's where the storytelling piece of it comes in.
Yeah, there was no way, as I was rereading this just a couple of weeks ago, there's no way to go through it during your reading experience and not feel moved by not just Bennett's story, but by the stories of the families and what you were able to get from them. And it really reads more like a couple chapters from a book than it does from a news story. So I thought you did, a great job with that. And, sometimes long reads, especially in this short attention span era, can be intimidating and overwhelming, but this did not feel like one of them. So that's a real credit to you. Um, you've touched on this a good amount, but I want to kind of go back to the chilly reception that Omalu gets, to his research from the NFL and from the NFL appointed doctors. Can you describe for us both some of the backlash that he faced and experienced, and also I assume you did, but did you face resistance from the NFL and others during your reporting process? What was that like, and how did you kind of handle that?
Yeah, I'll speak to Bennett first, because it really is his experience that I think is the most relevant. because he was really he was not treated well at all. Certainly not by the NFL and not by their paid doctors who they tried to silence him and then they simply just ignored him. They would have their big conferences where they say they're going to talk about this problem of concussions, big conferences inviting people from all over the world, everybody but him. And so he would have to give his research to one of the insider, popular guys to convey. I don't know what it was. Was it because he was not, he didn't look like an American? Was it because he was an immigrant? Was it a racial thing? I don't really ever find the answer to that question in my own heart. But the best I think was what one of the doctors said, he's marginalized because he can be. And we don't want his information out there. We just don't want it. And so he didn't give up. He just kept finding brains. He kept finding another player. And so he let his research speak, which is, of course, the way to do it. And he didn't take it personally all the time, although sometimes he did. But my own, I think that the magazine took a few hits from the NFL. I don't think they cared about like normal journalists going and doing her little thing. I think they could dismiss me in the same way they could dismiss Bennett until the story came out. Then it was like, oh. And that's kind of what happens is you let like Bennett, you let the research speak for what you're doing rather than just stand up on a soapbox. Probably is going to be more effective.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but he was only able to proceed with a very supportive boss, right? And also with the support of, was it the former Steelers team doctor?
Yes, Julian Bales, played by Alec Baldwin in the movie. It's so weird that these people become these actors. But Julian Bales at the time was he had been an NFL doctor specifically for the Steelers, and then became the chief of neurosurgery at West Virginia University. So he was really highly regarded, and he really encouraged Bennett. They teamed up actually, so that helped tremendously. I mean, tremendously.
Yeah, and just goes to show too, like how I feel like there's a very kind of thin line there where if, despite his dedication, if Omalu hadn't had that kind of support, this whole thing could have gotten squashed. And obviously it's very unfortunate that the other reason that he was able to continue proceeding with it was more brains becoming available because more former players were, dying at a very young age or even taking their own lives.
Correct.
So just going back to the reaction that you received and that GQ received, were you saying that the publication itself kind of got more backlash while you were just kind of dismissed? Were there any reactions to your story that stood out, even from a positive perspective?
Oh, sure. The positive perspective, most definitely, not from the NFL. I mean, it was petty things, and I'm reluctant to even. A lot of it was rumor, that Roger Goodell pulled the profile that they were going to do of him, and he didn't want to work with the magazine anymore. It's a lot of petty stuff, if it's even true. But what more, I think, importantly, is there were congressional hearings shortly after the story came out. That really was as a result of this research, that really took on like Goodell and his team of paid doctors, like what's going on. And as a result of those congressional hearings, then that team disbanded, which was a really good thing. You didn't have these paid doctors overseeing, and steering the research according to what they were being paid to say. So that was a direct, positive thing that happened.
I'm just curious, this story, it's from 15, 16 years ago. Is there anything that you would do differently, if you were to write the story today?
That's a great question. I actually don't think so. And that's a rare that's a rare thing for me to say. I think what you touched on was the telling of the story was really important. Um, and even as I reread it now, it is just essentially it's a classic kind of narrative of a David versus Goliath story. That there's a reason those are classic narratives, that we all can relate to that feeling of no one's listening to me and I have something really important to say. And so I feel like the telling of the story is what gives it the long legs that it actually still has. It's still making an impact. I think that's because it's almost a timeless kind of story, inside a very timely topic.
Yeah, and that leads me exactly to my next question, which is, and I've certainly noticed some of these things myself, but what were the most significant changes that happened because of your reporting and, of course, because of Omalu's research becoming widely known? Rule changes, better benefits for players. What kind of both immediately happened, but then slowly started to change in the years after your story came out?
I mean, I'm going to say in terms of rules changes and all that stuff, I'll say for better or for worse, like it's to my mind gratifying to see attempts to take the head out of the game. For example, there's a different way that tackles are being made now that aren't just like head-to-head contact. Um, the significant changes in youth football, I think, are really important. You're seeing, like, we never saw flag football around hardly at all, and increasingly, especially right after this, especially right after the movie, there was a real rise in flag football and doing sports that or even playing football in a way that's not going to be so immediately injurious to the head in youth football. For example, don't practice with pads until maybe one time before the game, because then you're not bashing in. There's a lot of movement towards improvements in helmet technology, which again, I applaud the effort, but even if you read in the story and if you just think about it, the physics of it, there's not much you can do to a helmet because the brain is suspended in a liquid. So when you're bashing your head into something and you have a helmet, the helmet's going with you, but your brain's going wah against the side of the skull. So the best helmet in the world is not going to prevent the basic physics of that. So I feel like that was kind of like, not sure why this that move was as why they were putting as much money into that, because I don't think ultimately that it yielded much. But certain changes in the game and maybe some attention to the retired players, but I wouldn't say much, honestly. If any sorrow I have, it's that angle of it. I just read a study yesterday that came out of a bunch of Harvard scientists, a survey that 1/3 of NFL players themselves believe that they have CTE. Because they're experiencing some kind of symptoms. That's 1 out of 3 NFL players. So we're not talking about it much anymore, but they are certainly.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty wild. I mean, certainly read a lot in the years since. I think the Washington Post maybe 5 years ago did a really thorough investigative series around this topic, and it kind of broke down how a lot of both former and current NFL players had decided they didn't want their kids to play youth football, and maybe not even football at all, but certainly not until the high school level. So I thought that was kind of an interesting effect of the dangers becoming more widespread. I'm curious, as we head into Super Bowl weekend with the NFL easily being America's most popular sport and, TV ratings being through the roof. How do you kind of feel about America's game today, with what you and the public know about the risks associated with it?
I'm so conflicted, probably like a lot of people, because I do love football. I love watching it. I think it's such a good game. It's such a good drama each time you watch a game. So I'm always conflicted by that because I like it, but then to sit and watch it now with the knowledge that I have, it's difficult because I feel complicit. As a fan, I'm supporting this mega gazillion corporation who maybe isn't looking out for its employees. It's hard to take when you know the severity of it. So, and it's such a big industry. Like I was reading back to the story, and I remember being shocked when I wrote the story that it was a $9 billion industry. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's so much. That's so big. It's bigger than Hollywood. But now it's a $20 billion industry, $20 billion industry. So it's a behemoth, and you're not going to kind of stop it. I take some solace in, well, now at least the players know. When I was writing about this and when Bennett was doing his research, they didn't know. Like no one was telling them what was going on in their brains. And even though there's science to back it up, now they know, now they can make a decision for themselves. So you can say, all right, well, you know what you're getting into. I will just, people say that to me, and I feel that, but my only come back to that is, yeah, but who's going to end up being the players then ultimately? It's going to be people who have no other option, who grow up in some kind of circumstances that football's their only way out. And so by God, they're going to do whatever they can. And I get it. Who wouldn't, to make, a gazillion million dollars. So you're going to do it. And we as an audience are going to watch basically. I mean, I don't want to be such a Debbie Downer about it, but they are killing themselves slowly.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the conflicted train for sure. I stopped watching football consistently probably, I don't know, 6, 7, or 8 years ago, as much as I love it. And still today, like I tuned into the Bills Chiefs game, because it was such an incredible game. Like you couldn't ask for like more drama and two fun teams, while at the same time recognizing the impact of the game.
Well, and I'll add to that, it's one of the few places where, people who disagree in politics, who disagree, like we're all in our little polarized worlds, but this is one place where everybody can come together. And so there's something like fantastic about that. Like how many group experiences do we have that we're all watching at the same time and all cheering for something or the other? Not many anymore. And so that's worth something. So I think this is complicated. I don't write it off as like, oh, bunch of like terrible people because you're watching football at all, ever.
Yeah, no, absolutely not, for sure. I did want to ask you, you've obviously done a lot of pieces like this, as you mentioned, in terms of kind of human interest and the effects of, a particular issue on, people who often are voiceless or aren't heard. Do you want to tell us about another piece you did that had a big social impact?
Only in terms of, you never know when the impact is going to come. I just have been thinking very, very much lately about a story I wrote about air traffic controllers in LaGuardia Airport. I just kind of embedded in there for a long while, and wrote about their lives and the work that they do. And the plea they were making, this is maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. The plea they were making for more controllers in the pipeline, the retirement rate was so high, for better equipment, for all of things that they were pleading for. And certainly that's what I was writing about. And a lot of that they have not gotten. And to see things that are now happening and controllers getting blamed is really difficult for me to listen to, because those people they are heroic in the work that they're doing. So that's one that comes to mind. I do some writing sometimes. I like to do writing stories about stuff I don't agree with and try and understand the other side of the and gun ownership, and trying to understand, sort of like why one segment of the country is so opposed and one segment is so pro, and is there any space in the middle? And that's kind of like continual work I do to try and find that middle space that's getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, that's really difficult work, and there's so much nuance in so many of these issues that often gets missed when people are just reading the headlines, which to all the students here today, remember to read past the headlines before reacting to a story that you see or something on social media. I wanted to ask you, speaking of students, about one result from a report we recently published called News Literacy in America, which was based on an online survey last year of 1,100 teens. The survey found that nearly half of the teens think the NFL playoffs and the Super Bowl are probably rigged. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that, the Kansas City making the game for the third year in a row, and Patrick Mahomes and the Taylor Swift, connection probably don't help this stat necessarily. I'm just curious what you think about this finding.
I read that earlier this morning, and I'm like, really? Like, the first thing it hits me is like, oh my gosh, I am so not cynical enough or skeptical enough. Like, I'm surprised at the level of skepticism among a more youthful population, and that's more what it says to me. Is like, whoa, where's that coming from? Is like, is that because we just don't trust our institutions at all anymore? I don't know. I never had that conclusion in my mind, but when you start throwing out these, the Patrick Mahomes bit and all that, and you're like, well, it doesn't look good, does it? But I don't know. I don't subscribe to many conspiracies, and that one, I don't know. I don't know if they need to be pulling tricks. They're making $20 billion. I don't know. What
Yeah.
do you think?
No, I'm with you. I understand kind of the sports fan perspective of, it's easy to be skeptical when the same team keeps winning, especially when they, keep winning close games. And when seemingly to everyone who is not a fan of that team, they keep getting, occasional 50-50 calls, if you will. But there's a difference between skepticism and cynicism, and
Yeah.
looking at things closely. If you really were to dive into this whole conspiracy and think about all the levers that would need to be pulled by the league and by the refs and by the players in a sport where both sides play so incredibly hard and it is so closely watched with hundreds of cameras, I do not subscribe to the conspiracy theory, but we'll see. Maybe the Eagles will win on Sunday to douse the Flames a little bit. But I wanted to ask maybe one more question here before we throw it back to Brittany for the raffle. Going back to the story, how long did it take you to investigate the topic? What obstacles did you have to overcome in order to get all the sources and information you needed to publish? This is something that I often think about too. I think, it's unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer publications that provide the resources for this kind of long form journalism and that provide the time to really report on a story. So I think our audience would be curious, like just in terms of the process and the timeline, what that was like.
Yeah, this kind of work takes a long time. It just does. And funding is desperately needed to support particularly local journalism. I mean, there's stories everywhere of that need light shown on them. And if you don't have the resources and you don't have the place to publish it, what are we going to do? So that's kind of like an area of great concern for me. But I think it was probably about 3 months of research in between all of it, and a lot of it, which honestly is kind of a little bit fast for this kind of story. But so much of it was already written in the journals, like it was interpreting data. It was the on the street finding folks and just making sure you're doing your due diligence all around that. And that is just time consuming.
Yeah. And of course, another big part of this kind of work is that details change and things happen. More players are diagnosed, more former players. So I think that's such a big piece of understanding journalism, whether it's a breaking news story that's happening in real time or even investigative piece, is that there are developments and changes are made to stories. Stories are updated. So it's really important to kind of keep tabs on that when you're making a judgment about a particular story.
Very, very, very good point. These things you don't know the implications that could happen, years from now. All you can do is like tell the truth that you find, and then it's like up to the world. But you do your part, essentially. If you're suddenly in this position, like, oh, I'm discovering all this stuff, I got to do my part. I got to tell in a way that people can consume it and put it out there. And then I don't have control over it anymore.
Okay, well, this has been great. And I do have a handful of fantastic questions from our audience. But before asking those, we're going to take a brief break from the questions, and I'm going to throw it back to Brittany, who's going to do the raffle and share a few NLP resources. Over to you, Brittany.
Thank you so much. This, as you said, Jake, has been such an enlightening conversation. Boy, I've learned so much about not just journalism, but concussions and football. And so we're just going to take a brief break to talk about the supporting resources because educators, we don't want the learning to stop here, right? So I wanted to remind you all, I'm going to share my screen one more time for you. I just want to remind you that we do have this a newsroom to classroom program where we provide experiences like this for you all the time. This is totally free. All you have to do is sign up to get a Checkology account. You can visit the Journalist Visit tab and peruse our entire catalog of journalists. Oh gosh, we have well over 100 at this time who are ready and willing to support you by Zooming into your classroom or coming in person if they are local. So definitely do that. In addition, I want to share that, as I said, Checkology is totally free. We have a Checkology lesson that goes right along with this. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. If you are a Checkology user already, what is your favorite lesson to use? But in addition to our lessons, we've got missions, we've got challenges, we've got exercises. I told you the learning does not stop. And again, these are all free resources that you can use with your students. The lesson that I'm speaking about that is really directly related is called Democracy's Watchdog. And our resource document has a link to the lesson, a link to our related resources, including classroom activities, news goggles activities, my Checkology notebook interactive activity. And we've got a lesson guide for you. If you are not yet a Checkology user, now is most definitely a great time to get involved. My team is going to be doing some follow-up webinars where we will be getting you onboarded onto Checkology. So you can access the link to register for those webinars on the session resource document, which we've been dropping in the chat for you throughout this presentation. And you can use this QR code that's on the screen. I'm seeing some people shout out our Daily Do Now slides. We do have Daily Do Now slides that come out every Friday. You can count on this resource. Our team does an amazing job giving you bite-sized questions so that you can infuse news literacy into your practice every single day. There is a link to those on the resource document as well. And before we go into our final Q&A, I have one more surprise for you all. We are going to be raffling off a swag pack with all of this cool swag that I am wearing, exclusive and limited edition merchandise. My shirt says, "Whoa there, partner, did you verify before sharing?" I've got on my critical thinking cap. And so as you were listening to Jeanne Marie and Jake go through their conversation, we were busy selecting a winner using a randomized picker. And I'd like to announce that the winner of our swag pack is Jennifer Tominski. I hope that I'm saying your last name correctly. Jennifer, congratulations. Please reach out to us in the chat. Let us know that you're here, and we will be in touch to get your address and send you your very own swag. Back to you, Jake and Jeanne Marie, to finish this incredible conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brittany. Wow, I spent the last couple minutes going through just some of the many great questions that people submitted. And I'm glad we still have about 10 minutes here to go through some of them. I apologize. I don't think we're going to get through all of them. But I wanted to start with this question about kind of your process. Can you describe the verification and the vetting process and the editing and legal scrutiny that your pieces receive to assure their accuracy and fairness?
Yes, in addition to my sort of like keeping the copious notes or whatever that is that I keep, and fact checking my own work, especially when it's finished, I'm going through and making sure, okay, did I get that right? Did I get that right? Did I get that right? Then it goes to an editor who's questioning, whoa, that's not really, I'm not sure about that. And then we'll question the writer. Then it goes to a fact-checking team. So then therefore that's a team, and they go through, I mean, every word and check it off. That's good. And that's good. Rigorous fact checking. I think that's really important to realize, so that if you're reading things in major publications, they've gone through vetting, as opposed to a social media post. You have no idea if that thing is true. You have just no way of knowing. And don't trust the writer. They may have thought they got it right. So that's another reason to value the journalism outlets that we have now.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many layers involved to that process, and obviously editors play a huge role. Have have you had a lot of stories where the legal team has needed to be brought in, or that you had to reach out to them with specific questions?
Yes, well, I will say the legal team almost always is involved, especially at the last. Sometimes they were like, but this one they were all over it, and making sure that, well, a lot of stuff is like making sure you're not like saying something about someone who doesn't know that you're about to say that. A lot of it is like you've got to be responsible to make sure that this is not some claim you're making on someone's life. It's somebody's life. So, but there's definitely a team of attorneys as well.
Yeah, and of course, a big part of journalism too is that, when you're reporting, say, on the NFL or any other entity, even if they don't want that reporting to get out, you are still reaching out and trying to get a comment from them, even if they are not going to give you anything. And reporters do that multiple times up until the publication of a story.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, it doesn't matter if they say no once, you ask again and again and again. And if you never get a response, then you say that, that's a kind of answer, they refuse to answer. That's at least you've done your due diligence.
Exactly. Okay, another question from the audience. Your pieces are incredibly detailed and read almost like a narrative, kind of as we were talking about, of your subjects' lives. What is your interviewing style like, and how are you able to get such in-depth descriptions of your subjects' lives through it?
Yeah, interviewing is one of my favorite parts of this whole process, and I say that as a shy person, so that's kind of its own issue. I never come with a list of questions, unlike I think a lot of people. I don't trust my own questions going into an interview, because then if I'm asking my questions, I'm just trying to get verification on something I already think. What I'm more interested in is, what is this person talking about? What matters to them? And so I'm having a lot of just chatting, and then figuring out like, oh, he's really upset about something. He's really upset about this autopsy he did. I never even heard of this particular autopsy, for example. Why is he so upset about that? And so then I'm digging, 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 digging. And, through that process, you know, I think I know people are not used to being listened to. And if you are actually genuinely curious and not faking it when you are listening to another person, that's like the greatest gift you can give them. And they're going to give back, that kind of its own trust. Like, I am listening to you and I'm hearing your concerns, all of them. And thank you. You go into it with some gratitude. And I'm never trying to dupe anybody, because I mean it. I'm not trying to trick anybody. I don't trick people in an interview. I'm like, I want to know. If you feel tricked, tell me, because I don't want to be doing that. So it's really, my approach is like that. It's very one-on-one, I would say human. How would I want to be treated in an interview?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. In a lot of ways, you're just having a conversation with a topic. You're not becoming friends with them, but you're really trying to glean from them their perspective and their understanding of an issue or of what happened.
Yeah, I will add to that it's after the interviews that I will go research like a maniac. Like, oh, now
Yeah.
I see what he's getting at. And now I'm going and I'm digging, I'm digging, I'm digging. I'm finding any inconsistencies. I'm, things that I'm going to challenge this person about. But mostly I'm just doing all that listening. That's the bulk of it.
Audience question from I believe from a doctor. They say that they work for a lab that studies CTE, and they are working to create community workshops for brain health. And one of their objectives is to combat misinformation surrounding CTE. From a journalist perspective, what would you recommend?
That's such great, important work. First of all, thank you for doing it. Um, I think if there's a suspicion around misinformation, I would always look at the source. Like, I'm not sure this guy's telling me the truth. Why would that be? Do they have a political interest? Do they have a financial interest? Are they selling some kind of snake oil type thing that they just want me to think about the way they think so that I'll buy their product? And weeding out all of that for the consumer. Because often misinformation comes from someone who has a specific agenda. And if their agenda is all about themselves and profiting, then I don't know that that's a trustworthy source. But if their agenda is like this group that just wants to put out information, then the more information, the better.
Yeah, always going to the source is a really good idea, and fully vetting the source. Brittany, I'm gonna throw it back to you really quickly. You have another raffle winner, and then maybe we have time for one or two more questions.
Absolutely. Y'all, there are so many people in the audience. You're so engaged. We had to give away one more swag pack, and I am so pleased to announce that the winner of the second swag pack is Jackie Coffee Scott. So, Jackie, if you are in the chat, please let us know that you're there. We will connect with you to get your mailing address. And the goodies don't stop there, you guys. Of course, we have to have something for everyone. So if you look on the resource document, you'll see that we've partnered with Nickel Pass to provide free year-long subscriptions to 5 news publications for our educators. That link is on our resource document. My colleague Terry just dropped it in the chat, and I'll send it back to you, Jake and Jeanne Marie, to close us out.
All right, I'm gonna finish here with two questions. One might feel like more of a downer, and then the last one maybe we'll try to lift the mood a little bit. Trusted, this is from the audience as well. Trusted news has been trending lower and lower and is at historic lows. Why do you think this is, and what do you think needs to be done to address it?
I would, similar to the other question, I would ask who is distrusting the news and why are they distrusting the news, and which news are they distrusting? I would look at the motivation of the people who are doing the distrusting, and wonder then from that perspective, which side are you on? What is the motivation for saying this is fake news, for example? Why are you telling me that? Why should I believe you? What is your agenda for saying that? Which one do I believe? I think it's very difficult now, with that kind of like dynamic that's going on. But I don't think that there's a reason that when the term fake news first came out, I was like, wow, I've never heard that term, like ever. And now it's really common. And journalists are being accused of it. And like, we didn't come from us, we've all been doing the work. So I do wonder, what's all this mistrust about? And what's all this trust for social media? It has not earned any trust. Just a regular kind of like people spouting their opinions is not really a great source.
Yeah, it's a very confusing and complex information environment, which is a big reason why we're here to help students be able to parse that, whether they are on a news site or scrolling a social site. For the students here, what would you say to them about if they're considering a role in journalism, about like just kind of the satisfaction that you get from doing long form work, from doing investigative journalism? Why should students really kind of invest in this type of journalism, and why is it so important here in 2025?
Well, I'll speak to important second. I would just say, though, it is so much fun to be in this kind of work. Sometimes it's depressing even, but it's still what you're doing is constantly feeding your hungry brain. If you're a curious person who just wants to know what makes the world work, it's the whole world is your playland, and you're following your instincts, and you're having ridiculous adventures, and it's just a wonderful, satisfying way to spend your life. to be constantly trying to understand the world a little bit better and trying to communicate it. And I don't think there's a more important, honestly, right now in our environment, I don't think there's a more important work. I mean that really sincerely. We need people to be always taking the lid off and saying what's really happening here, and making sure that people are telling the truth.
Uh-oh, it looks like Jake is having some connection issues, just like technology wanting to work when it wants to. Um, but Jake, Jeanne Marie, thank you so, so much for such an enlightening and informative conversation this evening. I think I speak for everyone, especially those in the chat who've been sharing. What you shared has just been so important for their students. We've got students across the country watching this right now, and I'm overjoyed. I do want to just remind everyone before you leave us today to check out all of our free resources. We want to make sure that your students get the tools that they need to be news literate. And as we talked about today, not cynical, but healthy skeptics when they encounter information. Thank you so much, everyone. And we're all hoping that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for all your work.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye.